Okay, so hi. Oh, this screen doesn't show my slides. I will move over here. So thanks for being here. I'm excited to be at WordCamp Asia and also to speak here. And yeah, we're going to talk about GPL, which is kind of the underlying infrastructure and ethos of everything that we do in the WordPress ecosystem. I think a lot of us, well, I can speak for myself, but I have been in the WordPress space for 18 years, and I do know things about GPL, but I think it's hard to fully understand what it means for us and what it means for our ecosystem. Also, what is the context in terms of open source? Where do we fit in to all of that in terms of free software freedoms, and things like that? And also, how do we build businesses in an open source ecosystem? Because that is kind of a strange thing to try to do when we're creating products that are basically freely available. And how do you create a business model around that? So we're going to go through that. First, just a bit about myself. So I'm Miriam Schwab. Like she said, I've been in the WordPress space for over 18 years. I founded a WordPress agency, sold that, and then I founded a startup called Static, which is static hosting and publishing for WordPress. And then Static was acquired by Elementor, and I've been with Elementor ever since. It's about 2 years that I've been in a position at Elementor called Head of WordPress Relations. So I'm here to collaborate, talk with, partner, etc., support the WordPress ecosystem and everyone and everything in it as much as we can. I want to thank Neil Peretz. So this is a talk about GPL. GPL has some legal angles and implications, and that's not my area of expertise. Neil is an expert in open source, and he guided me and gave me advice on this presentation. So thank you, Neil. He's managing partner of Enumero Law, which works with leading technology and financial service companies to scale up the protection and commercialization of their assets and brands. He was previously general counsel for WooCommerce, a U.S. Department of Justice trial attorney, and co-founder of the Office of Enforcement of the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Basically, a very impressive person with a lot of experience and knowledge. So what I'm going to present, he did help me with, but also, if I make mistakes, that's not his fault. So if anything's inaccurate or whatever, that's on me. But I'm trying to be as accurate as possible within my understanding. This stands for I am not a lawyer. So while Neil is, I am not. So that's my disclaimer. This is not legal advice of any kind. And, take this information and use it with caution and wisely. But the goal here is to just give us more of a picture around open source. Okay, so what is open source? We all know, I think, that WordPress is open source. Also, a lot of the technologies that WordPress is built on or depends on, like PHP, MySQL, Linux, and Apache, are all open source. What does it actually mean? So it's very basic and technical. Open source software is software with source code that anyone can inspect, modify, enhance. So there's software out there, you might use it and activate it, but you can also see the underlying code and do all sorts of things with it as well. But you at least have access to the code itself. Why did open source come about? So actually, until the 1980s, it was just generally assumed that software code was accessible to people. When software was created, people got it, and then they could look at it and analyze it and do whatever they wanted with it. And in those days, people did that in order to kind of troubleshoot or create workarounds for software that might not be working the way they wanted. And it was a very open approach to software. But then laws were passed that determined that software is copyrightable. So copyright is protecting content or text. And that started putting protections in place in terms of how people can limit access to the code. Obviously, the reason for that is, the copyright laws went into play for whatever reason. It kind of makes sense because it is a creation. But businesses embraced that because then they could protect their code and build businesses around it in that way. So what happened? This guy named Richard Stallman, who is a professor at MIT, they got a new printer, and the printer driver code came, and it wasn't open. Until that point, they had, printers are the worst, so they've always been the worst, and they always have issues. And so at MIT, when their printer had issues, they would actually just write little bits of code to make sure that things work smoothly. And then they got this new printer, and he couldn't do that anymore, and he got very upset. To him, it was like an indication of what was going to be with open source, with software. And so he, I think, kind of made it his life mission to create a movement around free software. And he released something called GNU, and it means GNU is not Unix, a ridiculous name. Like the G stands for itself. It's like a recursive whatever. But GNU is not Unix, and it's a whole manifesto around how software should be free and open. It's better for the world. It's better for everyone. And ethically, that's how it should be. Software should not be gatekept. And this is the manifesto, and you can find it online. And he started this movement called the Free Software Movement. The word free started to become challenging for this movement because, I guess it's human nature, people started to associate free with price. So to them it was like, oh, it's free software, that means it's like free of charge, and that's what it means. But the free doesn't mean that when it comes to open source. The free means that there are freedoms around it, and it's freely accessible. But as we know, you can think of many examples in the WordPress space, you can charge money for open source code. There are many examples here among the sponsors and just the attendees, people who have created plugins or products for the WordPress ecosystem that have GPL license, which we're going to get to, and are open, but they're charging for it. And that's totally legitimate. So free became problematic. So at the time, there were discussions around what we should call this movement or this approach to software. And I'll get to that. So what are the 4 freedoms? The freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose, the freedom to study it and change it as you wish, the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help others. So you can see there's like an underlying helpfulness to this approach, and the freedom to distribute copies of your modified versions to others. So people in the community and outside the community can benefit from your changes. So, but free, because of that issue with the tendency to see it as related to pricing, discussions took place, like there was a kind of committee, and they tried to find a more accurate way to describe this type of code. And someone named Christine Patterson actually came up with the term open source. And it was like a bit controversial because open source is just technical. It's like the code is open. The source code is open. That's it. It doesn't say anything about the philosophies or anything like that. Whereas open source, it's about making the code open because of the philosophies and ethics behind it, which is that everyone should have access to it. And so when you just call it open source, you're just being technical. So there's like a conflict around that. Most people adopted open source. This guy, Richard Stallman from GNU, he was against it, and he continued to call it free software and the free software movement. So it's free to use, not free to own necessarily, and we don't want them fixated on price. Oh yeah, and it was practical, not philosophical. So what is the philosophy of open source? Willingness to share. So it comes from a place of human knowledge gets better and grows and expands when we share it with each other and we can build on it together. Collaboration, transparency, so open communication and of course open code. And the idea that making software open plays a role in improving the world. Because again, if software isn't too expensive for people to access, they can use it to improve their lives, to improve their societies and things like that. But open source also actually has a lot of practical implications and benefits, aside from it being like a do-good type of thing. So when you have an open source code base, there's a lot of crowdsourced peer review. You have a lot of people looking at it, And if they care about it, they're going to give you feedback and input on how you can make it better. So an example of that is one that I just happen to know well, which is Elementor. If you go to GitHub, you'll find our core plugin freely available there. And you can see that people open issues. They tell us what they want. It's a good indication of where the company should consider, going next. They often help us with bug identification and troubleshooting, and some of them will even submit suggestions for code improvements. And so, when you're a company, you have a limited number of people in that company. But when you're an open source code base, you have the people in the company, and then your ecosystem of users who are actively involved in your code as well, and the more eyes on it, the higher the quality can be. Also, of course, more transparency. Through an approach like using GitHub, more communication can happen with your users, and they can know what's coming next, and they can see exactly what changes are being made. Security. So this is a bit controversial, but there is a perspective that also, because you have so many eyes on your software, so on the one hand, people will say, well, open source, that means that all the hackers of the world can know if there's a vulnerability. But it also means that a lot of people can hopefully identify vulnerabilities faster, and you can have a crowdsourced approach to security. So, for example, at Elementor, we have bug bounty programs where people out there can easily and clearly submit issues to us. They have their eyes on our code, and then we can take action and continuously assure that our users are secure. And that goes for all open source code bases. This is approaches that are available to everyone. And reliability, not dependent on one company. It's like what I said, when you're dependent on proprietary software with a company that has a finite number of people working at it, there's so much that they can do, there's so much that they will do, but when you have a community around the software giving input, then there's much more that can be done. Open source also tends to be very flexible. So one of the things that I think, this is just my opinion, that keeps WordPress as a leader in the CMS space is that it can do anything that you want, essentially. So if you needed to have a particular feature, functionality, integrate with something else, the code is open, and either there might already be a plugin that exists for it with the 57,000 plugins that are in the repo, or you can create one. And that means that you're not limited, you're not going to hit walls like you will with proprietary systems. And that flexibility is very powerful, and it's part of the practical benefits of open source. And no vendor lock-in. When you use WordPress, you can use it in any way that you want, or any open source code base. I'm just going to keep referencing WordPress because I know it best, and I'm assuming you guys do as well. So when you use WordPress, you can host it wherever you want. You can add plugins however you want. You can use whatever approach to page building that you want. There's many options out there, and you can put your stack together, and then if you're unhappy with something, you can move on. You can move to the next thing that's better for you, more appropriate for you. Maybe your company or organization has progressed and the needs are different, and now a different tool is better. Great, you can totally do that. And I think what's nice about conferences like WordCamp Asia is all of the innovation that's happening in this region, people creating all sorts of valuable products that augment and add more value, and it's really exciting to see because they just create what they think people need or they need, and often it's valuable to many people. And of course, open collaboration. Conferences like this, especially with Contributor Day, like we saw yesterday, where everyone comes together openly to contribute to the project, it adds a lot of value for everyone. So open source has tremendously impacted the internet as we know it today, and a lot, like pretty much all software. If the open source movement hadn't started when it did in the 80s, it's unclear what the internet would look like today. At that time, instead of it becoming very closed garden and limited, and limiting access to capabilities, communication, transparency, then I think the internet and, well, everything that we do would look very different. But because people were pushing forward an open movement, the internet could expand exponentially based on these technologies. And till today, even proprietary software, a lot of its code base will be consisting of open source elements. And now with AI, which is kind of like the next stage in expanding human knowledge, interaction, and capabilities, a lot of the AI is also built on open source models. It's, not everyone agrees that the models that are claimed to be open source actually are, because they have some limitations around them, but the fact that this knowledge and these models are pretty freely available, it means that people can really build on it, and it can also expand exponentially and bring value basically to all of humanity due to the more open nature of it. Okay, so how do you have open source software? Like, what does that entail? It's basically based on the license that you use. If you don't put a license on your software, then it defaults to having a copyright, because that's just how the law works. So that means that even if you create software and you put it on GitHub and you're like, here it is, you can all access it, if you don't have a license, it doesn't mean that people can copy it, add to it, modify it, and things like that. It means you own the copyright. So you need to add a license. There's a lot of license options, so I'm going to go through the different types. Basically, there's two main categories, permissive and copyleft. So let's look at permissive first. Permissive allows anyone to use, modify, and distribute the software without any restrictions or obligations. That sounds like GPL if you're familiar with it, but it's actually not. It allows collaborative projects to become proprietary if required. So this is the main difference between permissive licenses and copyleft licenses. If you create an open source software and you give it a permissive license, people can then take it and eventually turn it into something proprietary, meaning they can then close that code and charge for it and do whatever they want with it, but then they can limit access to it. This actually has benefits in some situations. It means that some people will feel more comfortable working with your open source code because they know that if they eventually want to turn it into something proprietary, they can. It also has some disadvantages, which is that, you know, maybe you've created very valuable code, you would want it to be freely available to everyone forever because that was your intention, but eventually it becomes proprietary, and that limits kind of that access to the knowledge. So it has its pros and cons. Yeah, and it can be incorporated into proprietary or closed source projects. Basically, the only thing you need to do to have a permissive license is add the license .text or whatever to your software. That's it. And then it's got the open source license. There's no other requirements. There's no other anything. If you work on software that has a permissive license, you need to continue to have that license there. But even if it's proprietary, it's there. Nobody can see it. But you're supposed to continue to have that and give attribution to the author. These are examples of permissive licenses. There's one called MIT, BSD, and Apache. MIT is the most popular license in this category, but also overall. This is the MIT license. It's kind of a beautiful thing because it's super short and simple. Everyone can read it. It takes 2 minutes, and you're done. And that's all you need. So simplicity is always a nice thing, and I admire that kind of license. It's not like the terms and conditions we see everywhere all the time. And that's it. MIT license, you're done. Copyleft. So copyleft is like an antithesis to copyright, right? Copyright protects your intellectual property. Copyleft makes your intellectual property open. And you can see this symbol. It's like the opposite of the copyright symbol. So copyleft licenses are contagious, or also like viral. Anything that touches something with a copyleft license must get that same license, which means that it can pretty much not become proprietary. It always has to be open, and you don't have a choice in the matter. You can't change the license at any point or anything like that. So this enforces user freedom during all stages. There's 2 levels of copyleft. So there's the strong, which apply to the whole program. So WordPress is a strong one. And then there's like a weaker one, which allows more flexibility so that not everything has to be GPL. Like if you add or integrate some libraries or whatever to your software, it doesn't mean that everything has to become GPL, so that might make people feel more comfortable. And these are examples of copyleft licenses, so GPL and Mozilla. GPL is the more popular one. And this, I just wanted to show you the difference between the MIT license and the GPL license. It's a lot of reading. So you can see the simplicity aspect isn't there. It says a lot. It's not so clear always. And to make it less clear, there's two versions of GPL. There's GPL version 2 and version 3. Version 3 added some things around trademark protections, patents, and things like that. And it has an interesting clause in there about not being able to charge money for other people's open source software. So we talked about how you can basically do anything with open source software. You can distribute it, et cetera, et cetera. Generally, it's understood that you can sell it. In GPL version 3, there is something in there that makes it sound like you can't. You can distribute it for free, but you actually can't sell it. So that kind of impacts these marketplaces, these GPL marketplaces like Festinger, if you're familiar with that. Theoretically, because of GPL version 3, they can't charge money, or they shouldn't charge money for open source software that they didn't create. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but that's kind of how I understand it. In terms of the popularity of these licenses, like I mentioned, so the permissive ones are much more popular. Again, because people feel more comfortable using it, it does not as strong a commitment to the code. If you work on it, eventually you can make it proprietary, and it seems to make people feel more comfortable. And of the top contributors to open source, which are big companies, Google, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, Red Hat, most of them are also using the permissive licenses. And the most popular licenses are Apache and MIT. This is an analysis of GitHub repositories and the licenses that they have. Okay, so that's like background on where the world we kind of live in. And now, why is WordPress GPL? So first of all, again, this is how I understand it. It's technical. Like I mentioned, if you build software or fork software that's GPL, you must also be GPL. You don't have a choice. So WordPress was created as a fork of B2 Cafe, which is the CMS at the time, which was open source and GPL, so it's de facto what it needs to be. But as you can see through the messaging that has been shared throughout the years from the founding of WordPress until today, and you can see it on WordPress.org, it's not just about the technical aspect. There's a strong belief in the importance and value of maintaining GPL code. And throughout the years, this has been enforced among us, the creators of plugins, themes, etc., that we all, as soon as our code touches WordPress, which is what happens when you have a plugin or a theme, then it must be GPL as well. So, and it's not, again, if it was just technical, you could kind of live with it, but the proactive enforcement indicates that it's an important element to our ecosystem. In some ways, the GPL is like our Bill of Rights as a community and as a project. Just the way that I see it also is, on the one hand, I mentioned that people prefer the permissive licenses because it can help their software go farther, because more people may want to work with it. But I wonder if WordPress would have grown to where it is today if it wasn't GPL. Because if people, the surrounding creator ecosystem, which is also, in my opinion, critical to the success of any project, but especially to WordPress, WordPress's success is due to a number of things, but also the fact that there were so many amazing, useful plugins and themes available from the start. If those had been easily made proprietary and closed, first of all, that would have limited options for people in terms of what they can do with their site. And also, it would have limited the way that we learn and expand on WordPress. I don't know about you, but I started to learn how to build WordPress sites and work with it by studying the code of themes and plugins. So if it wasn't available to me, or maybe many of us, then how would we have been able to learn and then create more for the ecosystem? So that is just a theory that I have. Okay, so what are the GPL freedoms for WordPress? The freedom to run, to study, copy and share, and modify. Business. So a lot of us here are involved in businesses related to WordPress. And having a business in the open source space is very strange. When people enter WordPress from other industries, and you're like, yeah, we have this free plugin, and it's used by like tens of millions of users, and that's fine, and we want them to continue to use it, and most of them won't pay us a cent. They're like, that sounds absolutely bonkers. How is that a business model? But it is, and many companies in the space are quite successful with it. So how? Like, how does that work? So first of all, this goes back to the open, collaborative nature of software. So this is actually from our GitHub repository, the number of issues and collaborative activity that happened. So that helps with the activity and the quality. These are the number of contributors to our project over time. You can see that with other projects as well. And here's just some of the companies that are very successful and are based on open source. Red Hat, I think, is probably one of the most successful, or the most successful. They were acquired for like $30 billion or something by IBM at one point, and they are strong advocates of open source until today. Kubernetes, Linux, Elastic, and Kibana. Kibana is also one of their products, all open source products with a successful and lucrative business model. So how do they do that? It's by providing services around it. So you have like the freemium model, where the free version may have a lot of features, but at a certain point, if you want more, you pay to upgrade. And then you continue to pay to get those upgrades from a high quality source. Services, implementations, hosting, all of these things, in our space at least, are good models for businesses to succeed and thrive. It brings its challenges, but like it also demands a certain level of creativity, which some people might find to be frightening, but other people will see it as an opportunity. It's a very interesting space to be in, not just in terms of the software and the innovation, but also from the business perspective. What is the one pretty defendable thing of your software? Your brand. People can take your software, they can copy it, but if they are going to then distribute it, they have to rename it, because otherwise they're representing themselves as you. Your brand is your promise to your users. Your brand isn't just your logo. It's you're going to get a high quality product, you're going to get service. It's being built by people with a lot of experience. We're here, we're committed. And if someone is distributing it under your brand, they're misrepresenting. And that is pretty much the main place where we can kind of protect our assets in the open source space. And it's very important to invest in your brand. Again, not just as a logo, but as a entity with that cares about quality, that cares about its users, because then you can also protect that. And then finally, community. So open source, the term is technical. It's like this code is open, the end. And it's software. Software is pretty dry, not very emotional and warm and cozy. It doesn't have a personality. It's just code. However, pretty much every open source project succeeds or doesn't based on the community, because those are the people that are contributing to it and helping it grow into the future. So there's a very human aspect to being part of an open source project, and we see this at these conferences. These conferences, again, in my opinion, are key and have been key since the beginning to the success of WordPress, because we come together, we get to know each other, we become friends, we can become partners, we can work together. Sometimes or a lot of the time, we're working together not to try to find like business partnerships, but partnerships that help us make our shared users' experience better, just so that they benefit from that. And we can learn from each other. And again, when knowledge is open, when software is open, we can all learn from each other and do better. So one of the great things that WordPress has going for it is our community. And if you, let me see if the slide is here. Nope, it's not. It was in the later version. If you go to wordpress.org/about, the mission has 3 paragraphs. And one of the paragraphs says something like, WordPress is inclusive and warm and welcoming. That's part of the mission. And if you've gone to WordCamps or been involved in the community in any way, you will probably have experienced that. Yesterday at Contributor Day, we have some people here at WordCamp who have never been to a WordCamp before and haven't really had a chance to be part of the WordPress community in an active way. And they just went to tables and sat down, and they were amazed at how nice people were. And they just, wanted to get to know them. And then they were able to contribute, however they were able to contribute. And it was a very positive and friendly experience. And I think that's a great benefit, and also big kudos to everyone in the community for adhering to that mission. I don't think people are making an effort. I think it just comes naturally that people are inclusive, warm, welcoming, and that way we can all build together better when we're not, against each other or feeling suspicious of each other, but rather we're working together, even with competitors. That's one of the most fun things for me, is working with competitors on making WordPress and our user experiences better. And we can do that in WordPress, and I'm not sure how many other ecosystems or industries are like that. So our community is also critical to the success of open source in general, and specifically to WordPress. And hopefully, we'll continue to see that going forward with continued faces, but also new ones joining the community. And that's it. So thank you. Oh, I just want to mention one more thing, which I forgot to say. So I mentioned that brands are your defendable asset. There is also a perspective, and again, I don't know if it's like legally proven exactly, but if you want to build on GPL software and you connect to it through APIs or the CLI, that's considered, that's called something called arm's length. And that may allow your software to not be GPL. Again, that, I don't know if it's proven, but that is one approach to it. So that's another place where software doesn't necessarily have to get the virality of GPL. But in general, I think our approach in WordPress is to embrace the GPL because it's gotten us to like 43% of the web, and hopefully will continue to sustain us. So, okay, so that's it. If anyone has questions, I think you can ask. No? Okay, so we'll be at our booth in the sponsor hall all day today, all day tomorrow. We have a great team there. If you want to come and learn, just discuss this more or anything, we'd love to have you. Feel free to come visit, and we also have some nice swag. And enjoy the rest of the conference. It's great that you're here, and it's great to be here. Thank you.